Hello, my curious cats, and welcome to episode 8 of the Psychology podcast, the podcast for all the info on psychology's most questionable history. I'm your host, Leslie Lopez, PhD student and psychology nerd. All right, is anybody else here like a huge documentary fan? Like personally, I love a good documentary, especially on subjects that are like historical or conspiracy theories, or if the two ever come together, like the pyramids. God, it's a wild Saturday night for me. I'm getting so old. But anyways, the other day I was watching the documentary Searching for Sugar Man. Have y'all seen it or have y'all heard of it? Well, it's about these two dudes who go out searching for an ex-musician named Rodriguez. And Rodriguez, he never really made it big here in the US, but through some bootleg work, he was able to make it pretty big in South Africa, where not only did he have like sold out concerts, but he was also really big in the apartheid movement. So these two dudes, they go out searching for him. He's nowhere to be found in South Africa, and they get so obsessed with this musician because there's like rumors and things that he's dead, but they're so set that he's not. They're so set that he's still alive, and they end up finding him in like Detroit, where he's just living this normal blue collar life, just an ordinary guy. But anyways, once the 10 out of 10, by the way, once the movie was over, for some reason, just being the person that I am, I go onto Google and I'm like, is Searching for Sugar Man based on a true story? Even though it's very clearly a documentary, but call it trust issues or whatever. But I did find some very interesting information. So I did find myself in a Reddit deep dive, as one does, and the thing is, there is a lot of like speculation that a lot of the info in the movie is farce information. And that's because a lot of historians believe that the apartheid history told in the movie was a little bit off. So then I went on and Googled more history on apartheid just to kind of like compare the info in the documentary to info from more legit sources about the apartheid movement. And that, my curious cats, is how I landed on today's episode. You see, when I went on to learn more about apartheid, I came across what is known as the Aversion Project. The Aversion Project was a medical torture program that took place in the South African Army during apartheid, whose goal was to take gay soldiers and force them to submit to curing their homosexuality. So, if you're a little bit insane in the membrane like me, get cozy tozy and let's get into it. Our but today is Dr. Aubrey Levin, born December 18th, 1938, Sagittarius. I briefly dated a Sagittarius once, so I get it. Levin is a South African born Canadian psychiatrist and former colonel in the South African Army. You see, between 1948 and 1994, South Africa was under some scrutiny. They faced a number of injustices through the apartheid that was present for decades. Apartheid is the implementation and maintenance of a system of legalized racial segregation in which one racial group is deprived of political and civil rights. So, in South Africa, apartheid was the racial segregation under the all-white government of South Africa, which dictated that non-white South Africans, the majority of the population by the way, were required to live in separate areas, use separate bathrooms, and pretty much just stay a distance away from white South Africans. The system came to an end on March 17, 1992, when a referendum was held to end it and the formation of a democratic government was made. So, Audrey Levin was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. Not only was he one of the white South Africans that we just talked about, I mean, look at his pasty skin, but his father was the first Jewish member of the National Party, a political party in South Africa that was responsible for the implementation of apartheid rule. The political party was the leading governing party in South Africa until the end of apartheid in 1994. So, not only was Levin white, but he came from a family that was part of the leading members of the National Party. Now, I'm not too familiar with Army rankings, but from what I've heard, Colonel is quite the high ranking. And side note, okay, I'm not alone. I know I'm not alone here, but I was well into my 20s when I found out that colonel is not pronounced how it's spelled. Like, you're telling me this isn't pronounced colonel? Okay, just another curse of the English language, but anyways. While in his position as colonel, Levin became a team leader of the South African Army's drug rehabilitation program at Ward 22, Military Hospital 1, in a small town near Pretoria. Levin led a group of over 20 doctors and scientists in various projects that aimed to treat a variety of mental health disorders, including drug addiction and homosexuality. For the record, homosexuality is not a mental disorder nor is it a disease, but in South Africa in the 1970s, it was considered as such. So at the time that Levin served in the South African Army, they were in apartheid. South Africa was in apartheid, and at its peak, the South African Army had over 100,000 active conscripts. Okay, I'm not too familiar with military lingo. My apologies, okay? I had to Google what the difference between soldier and conscript was, so here it is. The difference between the two is that a professional army is made up of soldiers who chose to make a career in the military. They chose to voluntarily sign up and serve their country, while a conscript army is a military system where the country's citizens are required to serve for a period of time. So basically, the draft. Now, most of the victims in the case were white males between the ages of 16 and 24. However, soon after, women were allowed to join the South African military as well, and they too were subject to the same treatment that we're covering today. So what would happen is that at base camp, there was this group made up of Army psychiatrists and Christian chaplains that would separate soldiers whom they suspected to be homosexual to military psychiatric units, primarily Ward 22, which, if you remember, is Levin's ward. Upon arrival, the soldiers were quickly subjected to physical and psychological torture. The patients were quickly stripped of their clothes and shoes and were given a set of brown pajamas. The medical staff claims that this was done to help prevent escapees because they'd be easier to track knowing what they were wearing. Also, each patient was given a cocktail of what Levin called a truth drug. That was essentially a mixture of Valium and a barbiturate before they, the patients, were officially taken in for questioning. Once in for questioning, the soldiers were forced to come out to their friends and family. For many of these victims, it led to their family losing respect for them so much as to pretty much kick them out of the family. This is the kind of reaction Levin and his team were looking for, because he would then tell these soldiers that there was a way for them to earn back the respect of their friends and families. Levin told them he had a therapy that would reorientate them. The soldiers were in such a vulnerable position that they felt like they had no choice but to agree to the treatment that was offered to them. Levin was convinced he could make heterosexual out of gay soldiers using electroconvulsive aversion therapy. The electroconvulsive aversion therapy consisted of strapping electrodes to the upper arm with wires running down to a dial calibrated from 1 to 10. The victims were shown black and white pictures of a naked man and were encouraged to fantasize, at which point the psychiatrist in charge of administering the therapy would administer a shock if the soldiers showed any form of sexual response. However, if the soldiers did show a sexual response to the black and white naked man photos, the voltage of the electroshock would be increased. Then, after the electroshocking, the soldiers would be shown colored pictures of a naked woman, which was supposed to stimulate arousal. However, more often than not, that failed. Why? Duh. Listen, I know this is a sad, tragic thing, but also I can't help but laugh just a little because of the logic that went on through these doctors. Just their tiny little brains. Like, no, duh. Now, honestly, I wish I could stop there and say, wow, that was horrible, but thanks for tuning in. Because sadly, this does get so much worse. When Levin and his team saw that their electroshock therapy to shock away homosexuality was not working, they took it a million steps further. Between the years of 1971 and 1989, approximately 900 men and women in the South African Army who identified as either gay or lesbian were subjected to gender reassignment surgery. the only known example of such operations being performed in any military hospital. The rationale, if you could even call it that, was that gay men were sissies and lesbian women were tomboys. Therefore, gender reassignment surgery would end their preference for the same sex by allowing them to fulfill their projected role in the body of the opposite sex. I really hope you guys are fully grasping this, because the victims were given new identity documents, including birth certificates. They were discharged from the military and told to cut themselves off from their friends and family. So you're telling me that after all the torture that these poor humans had to go through, they were banned from the military nonetheless? So what even was the point of all of this? To rid homosexuality one soldier at a time? Because that's what it sounds like. This was taking place at a military hospital in the late 1900s for 2 decades. It should come at no surprise that the surgeries too failed. The casualty rates were extremely high. A number of patients died during surgery, and some were discharged from the hospital and from the base camp before their reassignment was even fully complete. Okay, this meant that they were left on their own with the need for extra surgery to complete what the military had started. Without their consent, by the way. There was no informed consent obtained at any time during these procedures. There was no pre or post-op care assessments, and the expensive hormone regimens that were needed for the success of the reassignment were never provided. In a few cases where the doctors did manage to even complete the reassignment surgery, more often than not, it was completely botched as well. Sadly, but honestly not surprising, a large majority of the victims who went under Levin's treatment did unalive themselves in the end. That is, if they even made it to the end, because there were a number of accounted deaths resulting while the victims were on the operating table. This tells us the kind of conditions in which these procedures were taking place: unsanitary, unprofessional, and just completely unethical. Now remember how I said that these procedures took place between the years 1971 and 1989? There is no excuse, and not even on a technicality, for Levin to have had the logic that he did. Remember, Levin viewed homosexuality as a mental disorder, and according to the American Psychiatric Association, it was up until the year 1973 that they considered it a disorder. Did you catch that? The APA removed homosexuality from the DSM in 1973. However, Levin proceeded with his fucked up homophobic mentality and fucked up procedures from 1971 to 1989. He knew what he was doing, okay? And as a board certified psychiatrist, he knew what he was doing. I myself am a member of the APA, okay? I have a student status. As a PhD student, I try to continuously stay up to date with the big things, right? So there is no way that Levin didn't know that the APA no longer classified homosexuality as a mental illness in those 16 years. Levin's tiny little brain was so close-minded that he truly believed homosexuality was a mental illness. So much so that the patients that were sent to Ward 22 for their treatment were grouped together with other patients who actually suffered from real mental illnesses, including drug addiction and mental disorders. Which, by the way, they weren't off the hook either. Drug addicts and mentally ill people were forced to attend labor camps where they were forced into poor, dangerous, and unethical work conditions for extremely long hours a day and for little to no pay. Eventually, in 1994, with the end of apartheid, also came the end of the Aversion Project. Levin and his team of the other lunatic medics realized their treatments did nothing to cure homosexuality. And in 1995, some of Levin's victims came out to talk about their experience, which led to South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission to declare it a human rights violation and named Levin one of the main abusers of the human rights. When Levin found out about this, he quickly took off. And I mean quickly. The dude left everything behind, and he didn't even bother to pack up his office, which held a number of incriminating records. Levin ran off to, I'm gonna botch this, Saskatchewan, Canada, just a state east of Alberta. According to Levin, his immigrating to Canada had nothing to do with the accusations against him. He denied everything and insisted that his move was due to high crime rates in South Africa. Sure. Soon after arriving in Canada, Levin earned his license to practice psychiatry in Saskatchewan. Around 1996 or 1997, the TRC requested for Levin to go to South Africa and testify to the claims against him. However, instead of complying, Levin refused to and threatened legal action if they didn't leave him alone. Soon after this incident, Canada was informed of Levin's background, but they didn't respond to any of it. Instead, they gave him a license to work in the state of Alberta. That's 2 Canadian states, okay? And where he practiced psychiatry as well as taught it in hospitals and universities across Alberta. Way to go, Canada. Now, Levin did eventually agree to speak on his procedures. In the year 2000, Levin agreed to an interview with The Guardian where he shamelessly admitted to his treatments, stating that his aversion therapy only caused the patients some slight pain and that he only did it because they wanted to be cured. Yeah, okay, remember how he made the victims' friends and family ostracize them out of their lives, then promised the victims that it could all be fixed if they just agreed and subjected themselves to his aversion therapy? Yeah, I'm sure it had nothing to do with that. If anything, he just really knew how to target the right areas of the brain to manipulate his victims. You see, the brain has this area called the superior parietal cortex. It's located between the frontal and occipital lobes, areas that are hypersensitive to sensing information such as pain, pressure, electroshocks, which has some connections to certain limbic areas such as the amygdala, which is the area of the brain that is predominantly dealing with emotions. So, you could say Levin was pretty well versed in the manipulation category of the brain structure. Levin went on to earn his Canadian citizenship and seemed to live a seamlessly normal life up until March 2010, when accusations of abuse towards some of his male patients came to light. During one of their counseling sessions, one of his male patients secretly filmed the psychiatrist allegedly making sexual advances at him. Soon after, 30 other men came forward claiming they too were sexually assaulted by Levin during their counseling sessions. Oh, how the tables have turned, my curious cats. Can't say I'm not surprised, honestly. I mean, homophobia is just internalized confusion about oneself, and I think I'm just gonna leave that there. But Levin's license was quickly suspended after those accusations came out in 2010, and on October 11, 2012, Levin went to trial for the assault accusations, where in 2013, a jury found him guilty on 3 charges of sexual assault against male patients. He was sent to 5 years in prison, but posted a $15,000 bail, which the judge accepted because since his license was permanently suspended, he was not a danger to the public. Which, I'm no judge. I judge, but I'm no judge. But I'm pretty sure you don't need a license to practice psychiatry to not sexually assault someone. Does that make okay? As if that's the one thing that's going to stop him. But what do I know, I guess. Also, his wife was also arrested for obstruction of justice when she tried to bribe a juror to bring a not guilty verdict. She was on house arrest for 18 months and given 180 hours of community service. Levin was eventually sent to carry out his 5-year sentence after a court of appeals denied his request. Even after he was released from prison in 2016, he maintained his innocence despite the video evidence. He never admitted to the sexual advances. Instead, what he said was he was, quote, a victim of the system. Ooh, habló la víctima. And that he had no sexual motive for the sexual advances. In fact, he was quoted saying that he was not aware that what he was doing was a criminal act in Canada because it's allowed in his home country of South Africa. I'm sorry, what? No que like homosexuality is a mental illness? Okay, today Levin is 84 years old and still breathing. in Vancouver, Canada. Which, fun fact, is about like a 3-hour drive away from me. Ooh, road trip. He's still a Canadian citizen, and honestly, not much is known about him in his life today. He kind of just keeps quiet and out of public's eye, which honestly is best. Sadly, no effort has been made by the South African government to extradite him back to South Africa to face the charges for his human rights abuses. Well, my curious cats, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Sadly, there's not much of a bright side this time, but it's always a blessing to learn something new. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, review, and share with other curious cats. Please leave your thoughts and comments on today's episode, and please leave any suggestions for future episodes. I want to know what y'all want to know. Stay up to date with news and episodes on the podcast Instagram page at the Say Psychology Podcast. As always, citations will be in the description if you want to check those out. Stay blessed, stay sane, and stay psyched. I love you. Bye.